Oh, we are here tonight. Oh, look at that. We are here to talk about owls. And let me introduce myself. My name is Tony DeSantis. I'm the chair for the Education Committee of the PSO. And I'm speaking to you tonight from Lackawanna County in northeastern Pennsylvania. And we figured this would be a pretty good topic to begin our webinars, since regardless of your experience with birds, owls tend to be a fan favorite. And this is for a variety of reasons. Whether you associate them with late nights and an audio lure and you're trying to get some callbacks, the spookiness of Halloween, or maybe the number of licks it takes to get to the center of that Tootsie Pop, owls are exciting to see and hear. And the fact that hearing one, or better yet, seeing one, doesn't occur often enough for many of us, this is a group of birds that kind of allow us to not take for granted, because they're not a guarantee, unlike robins or chickadees or cardinals. It's always a nice surprise to hear or see one of these birds. And I want to open up by referring to a research paper that was published way back in 1971. And the research that was looked for was to answer the question as to how owls were able to hunt so well at night. Before this research came out, it wasn't known for certain. Ornithologists, biologists suggested, and they tried to prove different hypotheses. Some considered infrared detection, as in rattlesnakes and pit vipers. Some thought maybe it had a keen sense of smell, as in dogs. And some thought maybe to use echolocation, like bats and dolphins. And in this study, a barn owl, like we see here, was placed in a room that was completely void of light, so it's completely dark. And in this controlled environment, without a speck of light to influence the owl, and all those other hypotheses haven't been ruled out already, this owl was still able to locate and catch with pinpoint precision a mouse that they placed on the floor of the room. So how did the owl do it? And that is one thing we're going to discuss tonight. We're going to focus on those adaptations that owls have to help them hunt so well in low light conditions. And we're also going to talk about exactly what is an owl. Then we're going to talk about the 8 owls that call Pennsylvania home, the ones that we hopefully find in our backyards, at our parks, sometimes in urban areas. And I'm going to try my best to keep this under an hour. I appreciate the time that you're spending with me already, but I don't want to take it for granted. So that means there's some things I might gloss over, or some details of their adaptations I might have to skim. But hopefully tonight will motivate you to get out there and learn more from other resources. And also, if I state anything that you catch is out of date, or maybe just completely wrong, please let us know in the chat. I'm always happy to learn more and more about really everything. Just be gentle about it. Be nice. All right. So before we talk about the adaptations, let's talk about what makes an owl an owl. And owls are clumped into a group known as an order. So in the world of birds, there are 23 of these groups or orders, and owls make up the order Strigiformes, right? So all these owls share anatomical similarities, they share a common ancestor, and going back to those anatomical similarities, many of these we can't see. There's skeletal structures that are looked at, muscular structures, organ structures that we can't see. But some of these characteristics that make them a common feature, we can. And some of these kind of give us a gist or an impression of what an owl looks like, right? And one characteristic that gives us the general impression of an owl is that face. And what we see when we're staring eye to eye with an owl are these large forward-facing immovable eyes that are surrounded by this disc-like face shape. And we're going to talk more about that soon. I just want to bring this up just for a common characteristic. Another key characteristic is that it is one you wouldn't notice particularly unless you're holding an owl, which would be pretty amazing for many of us, or if you got really close to one. But owls, when you're looking at their toes, have two toes that are pointed towards the front of the body, while two point towards the back. And this could be found in other bird groups too, like woodpeckers and parrots. And this is known as Zygodactyl Toe Pattern. However, notice the photograph on the right, that nestling or fledgling owl there. Nothing I just described is seen in this photograph. What we do see is that the owls have this ability to pivot their fourth toe, their toe number 4 there. So by being able to swing that back and forth, they can more or less change the pattern of their toes. In fact, on this young owl, they're not even matching. Its left foot actually has 3 toes pointed forward, and then its right foot there has all its toes spread out. So this allows the owls to, perch pretty effectively, but more importantly, to catch prey very effectively. Think of someone palming a basketball. They have to spread out their fingers nice and wide. Well, when these owls are coming down to catch a prey item, they're spreading out those talons, making a nice net-like structure with their feet. Now, in the order Strigiformes, there are 2 subdivisions or families. The first is family Titonidae, which is pretty small, only consists of 17 species, and these are the barn owls. And here it's represented by one found in southeastern Asia, the Andaman masked owl. And then the second family is the family Strigidae. And these are have the common name, the typical owls. And these include about 190 species, here represented by this really cute owl I wish we had in North America, the northern white-faced owl, just found in the central latitudes of Africa. Comparing these 2 groups, there are going to be subtle and hidden differences, but the one that quickly stands out is the shape of the face. In barn owls, you typically have a heart-shaped disc. You also see it mentioned to or alluded to as a monkey-like face. And in typical owls, you have a rounded or an oval face shape. Also, some other notes. Owls and Strigidae tend to have the ear tufts that you can see on the white-faced owl here. Not all of them, but many of them. You will not see that in the barn owls. Also, there's some differences in the length of the toes, which is kind of a minor detail. However, barn owls actually have a serrated margin on their middle toe, the claw, or the talon of their middle claw, which is, I believe, used for preening purposes. So that serration you won't find in the typical owls. Worldwide, there are about 207 species of owls. And that depends on what's been lumped and split since I've last looked up that number. So 207 might vary up or down as taxonomists look at DNA and different associations and relationships. The largest owl, which is seen here, is the Blakiston's fish owl of Eastern Asia. And females weigh up to 10 pounds. So that's about the size or the weight of a small, mature bald eagle. Bald eagle females get to about 10 to 14 pounds. However, the wingspan is pretty similar. They're about 6 foot wingspans. So a massive bird. Fortunately, we have to go to Eastern Asia to see one of those. Here we have a stunning owl. This is a spectacled owl found in the tropics of Central and South America. Owls are found on every continent except one, which is Antarctica, and they live in just about every habitat, including wetlands where some species actually hunt for fish. So there's a variety of habits and behaviors that's found in this order. But let's focus in on North America for a moment. And North America ecologically is defined as being north of the US and Mexican border. Once you go into Mexico, we begin to encounter tropical ecosystems. So we're talking about the US and, of course, Canada. And in this region, we find 19 species of owls. And this includes the only one that nests underground, the daytime hunting burrowing owl, which is found in the western US, south into South America, as well as an eastern population in Florida and the Caribbean islands. We may not have the largest owl in the world, but we do have the smallest, seen here, the elf owl, which is about the size of a soda can. And you do have to travel a little bit to find this one. You have to get to the southwestern US and into Mexico. And in addition to the 19 species that have at least a portion of their natural range in North America, there have been 3 additional species that have been documented as rarities. Birds that have wandered far from their home range. One that was found in Alaska, the Oriental Scops owl, is one that would normally be found in northeastern Asia. And 2 have been found in southern Texas, the Stygian owl and the mottled owl, which are resident birds of Central America. Now we're going to tighten in our focus to Pennsylvania, right, our home state. And here we have 8 different kinds of owls, plus 3 species that have been recorded as rarities. And I'm going to go over the 8 species that are our expected species in the second portion of the presentation. But let's look at the 3 rarities that have been documented in the state. These include the boreal owl, seen here, the northern hawk owl, and the great gray owl. All 3 of these are species that range within Canada and northern tier of the US, and have pretty limited seasonal movement. So to see any one of these in Pennsylvania would have been quite exciting, and maybe one of you tuning in were one of those birders who got to see and document one of those 3 owls. Now let's move into the core of what really makes an owl, their ability to hunt so effectively and efficiently in the dark when most birds have settled in for the nighttime. And we're going to explore 2 different sets of adaptations found in these birds. First is how they are able to track prey and hunt in these dark environments through 2 of their senses. And then we're going to learn how they're actually masters of stealth through the performance of their wings. Let's go back to that research paper I alluded to earlier that was published in 1971 involving this barn owl. What was discovered was this: when there's no light available to be used, an owl can still locate, track, and then land on top of its prey with deadly precision, all with its sense of hearing. And there are those magical ears seen through the feathers here of its head. And they've been able to obtain this really phenomenal skill through different adaptations that have evolved that they rely on. and one of which can be seen in this illustration of this skull. So take a second and look at it, and they're kind of marked, they're labeled, but why don't you take a look at this diagram of an owl skull, and I'm going to bisect it into two. And one of those adaptations should be really obvious now that the line's drawn. The ear openings on many owls, not all owls, but many of them, are asymmetrical from one another, where one ear opens higher on the skull compared to the other. Some owls do have symmetrical ears, but they also will have movable vertical ear flaps. So think of maybe our tragus right in front of our ear canal. Those themselves are asymmetrical. And some owls, like the barn owl, actually has both features. This is a really ingenious quirk or feature, because now owls, by having asymmetrical ears, can use what's called bicoordinate sound localization. And what this means is that when an owl picks up a rustle in the grass, say from this vole here, this meadow vole, the sound will enter one of its ears at a minuscule difference in time compared to the other ear. We're talking on the range of milliseconds. Also, the owl is experiencing a difference in intensity or the volume between each ear. So by adjusting the elevation of the head and the bearing of its head, so the left and right or up and down, once everything equalizes, the owls will be facing dead on to the source of the noise. All it must do now is track it, and the eyes just stay on course, and even if they don't see the subject. So it's really amazing. Now, some of you may be asking yourselves, well, I can pick out noises too and where they're coming from. And we can, but not to the extremes that owls can. In fact, I'll throw in some human physiology here. We actually have some limitations here. I encourage you to Google the cone of confusion, which is kind of this blind spot that we have in our sense of hearing, where the space around us, there's actually points where we're unable to tell exactly where a sound is coming from. You can see in this cone here, also sounds that are in our vertical plane. So think of things right above our head. Sometimes they're a little harder to locate. Now, if sound localization wasn't good enough, why not enhance the sound and fine tune it, right? So remember, I mentioned at the beginning how owls have that disc-like shaped face that gives us the impression of we're looking at an owl. Well, here's the face of a great gray owl, and that disc really stands out. It looks like someone took two bowls and kind of pressed it into the fluffiness of the feathers on the head, right against the bridge of its nose. And this shape might look familiar if you've been watching football lately with the playoffs, and of course the Super Bowl is coming up, because it resembles what you might see on the sidelines, those parabolic reflectors that are attached to the microphones. Those reflectors are used to pick up all of those audio details that get drowned out from the crowd behind the microphone and everything else going around. So those facial discs that we see on the face of an owl, they're made up and bordered by these stiff, dense feathers known as the ruff that direct sound directly to the ear openings, just like the parabolic reflectors do for the microphone, or a satellite dish does to an antenna. So it's actually redirecting sound directly to its ear openings. And of course, these are movable to a point with those ear flaps I mentioned earlier. And you could do this yourself. If you take your hands and cup them behind your ears, you'll notice that sound levels increase a little bit and things are a bit clearer. So I know when I'm out in the field, I If I hear something off in the distance, my hands go right up to my ears, and I try to hone in on that noise. Now, in the real world, outside of that pitch black room in 1970, 1971, there's usually some light that the owls can use at night. There's the moon, there's stars, there's reflections from water sources. So, is there really ever a time when an owl is relying on its sense of hearing 100% in order to catch a prey item? Absolutely. If you're up in the northern tier of the state, we have snow on the ground right now, maybe not as much in the southern tier. But think of the snow outside. Think of woodlands that are filled with thick leaf litter, grasslands that have matted uh, um, stems of goldenrods and milkweeds and grasses. Those are perfect refuge places for deer mice and voles and all of those little critters that are trying their best to avoid being seen. And whereas hawks and falcons are busy scanning with their eyes, owls only have to listen and they know exactly where that animal is. So it's pretty wild and pretty impressive. Now, that doesn't mean that owls lack in the vision department. Um, I guess we could say they're greedy things and they just want the best of both worlds, um, because they have superb vision as well. We mentioned earlier they have forward-looking eyes, which is termed binocular vision, just like we have. And this is typically found in predators, as binocular vision offers a well-defined depth perception. So now we can see, or we could calculate how far something is. If you're an animal that's constantly trying to figure out what's in its surroundings, it's always on the maybe it's anxious and making sure it's not being followed by something. You're going to have eyes more on the sides of your skull. Here we have the red squirrel with those widely set eyes looking off to the left and the right. In fact, you can only see one eye in this photograph. These eyes being offset so much offer a very small degree of binocular vision. However, they're great for the peripheral vision. So they're perfect for knowing what's around them. However, if you're to try to throw one of them a tennis ball, it would probably have a hard time catching it. We could catch that ball because we have a defined depth perception with our binocular vision. And predators like owls are the same way. And I found this illustration of the actual eye of an owl. And when we think of an eyeball, we think of exactly that, a ball, right? A sphere, a spherical shape. Owls are different. They have these eyes that are actually elongated tubes that actually flare in the rear of it. So the front of the eye is to the left, the rear is to the right, with the optic nerve leaving the rear. And the eye is also encased in a ring of bone known as the sclerotic ring. And here's a model of a great horned owl. You can see that ring very well. We as humans and as mammals, we do not have this ring of bone. This is found in all birds, fish, and most reptiles. And what this does is that it actually holds the eye firmly in place and gives the eye a structure or supporting system to it. And this comes in comes in handy when these birds are flying around, because when they have that air pressure pressing against the eye, it would actually compress the eye, leading to a distorted vision. So by having this sclerotic ring, it allows these birds to have sharper detail to see the world in. If you're a photographer, think of it as comparing a zoom lens to a prime lens, right? A prime lens is fixed, has better glass, and you can see, or you could take higher quality photographs compared to something that may not be as expensive. Unfortunately, with the sclerotic ring, it means that the eye itself cannot move around. So they can't roll their eyes. They have to actually move their heads around in order to aim up what they're looking at. So that's why you see birds bob and flick their heads around to align their vision. And that actually helps the bird in a way, because when they look to the left and then shift their head over to the right, they can actually get a better calculation of a distance to the subject it's looking at, whether it be a landing surface or a prey item. Now, one thing owls can do that a lot of other birds can't do when it comes to looking around is literally looking around. Owls have extremely flexible necks, and this allows them to twist their head 270 degrees. So some people automatically assume it's a 360-degree turn they can make. Not quite that far, but we're looking at 270 degrees. And to give you some perspective of this, if you're looking straight ahead at your screen right now, and you turn your head over your shoulder to the left, you'll get 90 degrees plus or minus, depending on how many times your neck has been sore when you wake up. That's as far as we can get. An owl, however, can keep turning its neck until first it's looking directly behind it, and then it's looking over its right-hand shoulder. So it's really remarkable. And this comes in handy if the owl hears something from behind. Rather than adjusting its entire body, turning around on a branch where it's perched and potentially making noise, it can just swivel its head around and reduce any type of commotion that would give itself away. Now, to help see at night, owls have two more features found in their eyes. In our eyes, there are two types of light-sensitive cells, or photoreceptive cells. We have retinal rods and cones. The cones are what allow us to see the world in color. In order to do that, however, we need plenty of light. So we need daytime conditions. The retinal rods, however, allow us to see in low light conditions, but at the sacrifice of us being able to discern coloration. And in owls, the same cells are found. However, the density of light-sensitive rods are vastly outnumbering the color vision cones. So this gives them superb vision in low light conditions at the sacrifice of what we deem to be color vision. They have some species can see some color, but not everything that we can see. And of course, we don't see everything either. Also, because their eyes are so big, between 1% to 3% of the owl's weight, there is a lot more room for more and more of those photoreceptive cells, which means greater sensitivity to light. And the other adaptation that they have can be seen when you're driving down a highway and you get the eye shine from a deer or a raccoon or my cat. That eye shine is produced by a specialized layer of tissue in the rear of the eye called the tapetum lucidum. And this mirror-like surface allows any light that weren't captured by the photoreceptive cells to bounce back through the eye, giving those cells a second chance. So animals that are active at night that have this feature are trying to take advantage of every possible light wave and photon that they can capture. Now, during the day, owls can see just fine. They can't see in color, so it's probably more of a grayscale, I would assume. But they do need to limit the amount of light coming in because their eyes are so big. So this is why we often find them squinting back at us if we come across one during the daytime hours. And one thing I've read, but I couldn't confirm in a publication, owls can consciously open and close their pupils, and each eye is independent of one another, which is pretty fascinating. Okay, so we saw how owls find their prey, but they still need to catch it without revealing themselves. Keep in mind, animals that are active at night, many of them have excellent hearing too. So how do they sneak up on those voles or those mice that are wandering around? Because I'm sure you've had the experience of having goose or a large bird fly overhead, and you've heard the noise it makes just by flapping. Even small songbirds like chickadees and robins, when they fly, they're making noise with their wings that we can hear. And that noise is from the air turbulence being forced up, over, and then back together again of the wing surface. Owls have a way around this that gives them at least in our perception, a completely silent flight. And in this photograph, I circled the primary leading edge, or I should say the leading edge of the primary feathers, primary flight feathers. And on those leading edges of the feathers, they are serrated. Think of saw teeth or knife serrations. Not smooth like we typically see on, say, a crow feather or a robin feather. These teeth actually break up the air that's flowing over the wing into smaller streams, thereby reducing the buildup of turbulence that would allow us to hear the wings flapping from a goose or a robin. And secondly, on the back edge of the wing, so they're trailing edge feathers, those feathers are fringed and a lot softer, so it allows the air to join back together nice and silently. Plus, the feathers of their body, the contour feathers, absorb any noise that's also produced. So between those three features, the amount of noise they hear is imperceivable to us. In fact, for us to pick it up, we need ultra-sensitive microphones hooked up to a computer, and we're just seeing little blips of a sonogram. So this allows them to fly literally in acoustic stealth. And they have one more trick up their sleeve. Because owls have such large wings in relation to their body mass, they don't need to flap as often to fly from point A to point B. So without having to flap, they're reducing the production of turbulence altogether. And as they're honing in on a target, such as that mouse on the ground, they actually glide right on top of it. So between all this adaptations and the behaviors, one, the mouse or the prey item never hears the owl coming in. And two, because the owl isn't drowning out the source of the noise that it's trying to focus on, it could just stay focused on noise production of the prey without hearing itself flap and fly through the air. All right, so now we saw how owls operate during nighttime. Let's learn about the 8 species that are found in Pennsylvania, at least part of the year. And while I transition, I just want to point out that most of the photographs you've seen and all the photographs you'll see coming up, I believe, are through contributors of iNaturalist.com, which is a really great community science project. Fantastic data, open to anyone to record and document observations. And I will be using audio recordings too coming up. And those are through contributors of xenocanto.org, which is another community science project that documents vocalizations of birds found throughout the world. So a good source of data and open for anyone to contribute. Okay, let's start learning our owls. And here is our largest breeding owl in Pennsylvania, and probably the one that most people envision when they hear the word owl. This is the great horned owl. And that name is misleading. Those are not horns atop of its head, and they're not part of its ears either. They're just tufts of feathers which are found on a number of owls found in the family Strigidae. And the thought behind them is that it helps to break up their silhouette when they're roosting and trying to blend in with their surroundings during the day. And there's also some sources saying that they're also used in display purposes with mates or other individual owls of its species. Great horned owls are permanent resident in Pennsylvania, so they don't migrate south for the winter. And they're found throughout the continent. They have a huge range. They could be found, of course, in our woods, but they're found in the deserts of the Southwest. You'll come across them in tundra along the Arctic Circle. I've heard them in residential and semi-urban areas. So they're quite a cosmopolitan bird. And being such a large bird, 44-inch wingspan, they could take bigger prey animals up to the size of rabbit and skunks. And lucky for them, owls do not have a well-developed sense of smell. So if they do go after a skunk, the skunk's defense mechanism is not going to work. Great horns will also prey on smaller owls and have been known to attack humans who have ventured too closely to their nests, which typically are used hawk or squirrel nests or large cavities formed in broken trees. So to help us identify these owls, of course I'm using photographs here, but we're going to learn some of their calls. And we're going to look at their typical calls. Of course, these species have vocabularies, different calls, whether it's begging or alarm calls, but we're going to look at their typical calls to learn tonight. And the great horned owl gives a muffled, "Who's awake? Me too."
Tony, we're not hearing sound right now.
Oh, that's not good.
Did you, no, did you share it with sound?
I did, because I remember tested it out.
Yeah, and then you didn't leave after that.
No. Well, that's a bummer. Now I gotta sing.
Yeah, he was trying to play, I think, a bird call, so that's what I think we were waiting for.
Yeah, that's a bummer. Okay, so apparently sound is not coming through, unfortunately, and I'm kind of bummed by that.
Tony, you switched microphones since we did our test.
I did. Let me see if that would make a difference. Anything coming through?
I can hear you, but not the.
Okay.
You want to
I don't want to keep people waiting and
reshare?
Nancy. I can reshare. Just go through the slides real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, if no one.
With the other audio, I don't know if it makes a difference with the other audio you were using. But.
It shouldn't.
Okay.
All right. Well, I can reshare. Hopefully this will work. Just give us some second, folks. Sorry about the delay.
Bruce suggests try ending the slideshow and just playing the audio. So if there's a way you can just play it.
Is anything coming through now? Because I did reshare it.
No.
Okay, let's see if we can do that.
Oh, that's a good suggestion too, to paste the link to Xenocanto.
I could do that. Yeah, what we could do too is I could share links with. Can we send out an email to everyone?
Yep. Yeah. We can do
Okay,
that.
we could do that then. And also, we're putting this on YouTube too. So, although it's going to have, hopefully, the recording picked it up. I don't know, but we will figure it out and get everyone up to speed. But I'll sing too. So, who's awake? Me too. All right. So that's the great horned owl. Kind of a muffled call. It's kind of weird too. Females are larger than males in the owl world, but females will have, at least for the great horned owl, a deeper voice, or I'm sorry, a higher voice, which kind of goes against what you would expect. Okay, and I apologize for that technicality. It didn't work out for us. Okay, let's move on though to the barred owl. And this is, from my experience, the most common owl I come across. You could hear these during the day, especially in overcast days. I hear them summer, winter. They're quite vocal compared to some owls that may only vocalize nocturnally, and that's it. And some of which only vocalize more or less during the breeding season. Notice this is the barred owl, not the barn owl. The bars refer to those horizontal lines around its neck and upper chest. And this is our second largest breeding owl. And like the great horned, we'll go after smaller owls and small mammals like voles and, of course, woodland mice. And speaking of woodland rodents, here's an owl throwing back one, and it is prepared to swallow it whole. And this is normal feeding behavior for owls. They just swallow their meals without breaking them apart. And why they do this is because many times when owls pounce on the animal onto the ground, they won't carry it away to a branch to eat it. Instead, they're going to catch it and then try to spend the least amount of time exposed to other predators or other hazards, such as people possibly. So they're going to gulp it right down. When they do that, however, yes, they're getting nutrition from the flesh, but they're also swallowing hair, bones, feathers, depending on the item. And like us, they cannot digest those substances. So in the upper portion of their stomach, the hair, the bones, feathers, they clump together and into what's called a pellet. And that pellet is then coughed up, getting the stomach ready again for its next meal. And if you ever come across one of these, you can break them apart and find the bones of the animals they are ingesting. So it's pretty neat. And if you have kids or if you're a teacher, really great lesson plan for the young people and adults too, I think. The calls for the barred owl, which I'll try to play, but it may not work, quite distinct, which is the case for all our owls. They give a characteristic, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? So let's see if it works this time. I hope that came across. If it didn't, again, we're going to get you all the material so you can learn these. And neat thing, though, with barred owls is when you have a pair interacting, it's quite a dramatic conversation that they have. Very vocal, very comical, to tell you the truth. Again, I'm going to play it, but if you can't hear it, I sincerely apologize. Oh, good. And I was able to pull up the chat. You can hear it. Fantastic. We did. Yes, very, very fun to hear when you get two Bart Owls or more communicating with one another. It is just enlightening and such an experience. So hopefully all of you joining us tonight will have that. If you haven't already, get that chance. Okay, so sound is working. Fantastic. Okay, so this grumpy little guy is common, again, throughout eastern US and Pennsylvania. Another fun owl to listen to because it has quite a spooky, I guess would be a good description, call. In fact, there's a lot of folklore behind the calls of this owl, the eastern screech owl, lending it common names like demonic birds and being foreshadows of doom. But it's just this little guy calling. A lot smaller than the previous two. They feed on a large diversity of animals, worms and insects like katydids and grasshoppers, small reptiles, small songbirds, and small mammals. Now, unlike the last two owls, which will use abandoned hawk and squirrel nests to build their nest in, as well as cavities, screech owls will only use cavities, including, as you see here, man-made boxes. So if you have proper habitat in your property, you may want to consider putting one up for a screech owl. And speaking of breeding for owls, the timing is much earlier than other birds. We think of birds laying eggs in April and May when the flowers are blooming and the snow is gone. Owls are breeding more or less now. Great horns will have eggs laid by January. Bards owls in February. Screech owls, same thing. And then they'll go into early spring, maybe early summer, getting those fledglings ready to be independent. And this might go back to their ability to capture food when there's snow on the ground. Other birds are having less of a food resource. Owls are doing just fine. So as long as they're able to provide for their partners and for their young, they can nest. Unfortunately, that means for us, the best time to get out and listen for owls is when it's cold out. So we have to be able to withstand those frigid nights in February and early March. Eastern screech owls are found in 3 color morphs. There's red, brown, and gray that we see here. And there's really no rhyme or reason other than dominant and recessive genes. It's not a symbol of gender or a subspecies. In fact, you can have the same clutch or brood in a nest, and you can have all 3 morph colorations. The calls, pretty easy to remember and pretty fun to listen to. They actually give 2. And the first one is called the whinny. It's like a horse-like descending in pitch whistle. And the second one is a spooky sounding tremolo. So in this recording here, we'll hear the whinny calls first, and then it'll change into that monotone tremolo towards the end. So really, really cool bird to hear. Again, those whinnies, that descending in pitch whistle, and that tremolo almost has a structure like a ping pong ball being dropped on a table. It kind of bounces. Next is our smallest, and I will say the cutest owl in Pennsylvania. This is the northern Sawet Owl, and this is named for its repetitive call that uh, was said to sound like a blade being sharpened on a whetstone. When we play the audio, I hear a truck backing up. That's my imagination. This is another cavity nester like the Screech Owl, but unlike the last three species, which are all permanent residents in our state, most sawets that we document in the state actually come from northern populations when they migrate south for the wintertime. They do breed in Pennsylvania, however, just in lower numbers and mainly along the northern tier. That being said, there's still a lot of research going on with Sawet owls, and there's a lot of things still unknown. In fact, up until really fairly recently, this bird was considered to be rare in Pennsylvania and throughout its range. However, there's been a number of different research projects, including coordinated banding stations that are set up primarily in the fall migration, looking specifically for these birds, and they're turning up in large numbers. So they are here. They're just incredibly secretive, and I think it's one of those birds that will only vocalize, one, nocturnally, and two, more or less during the breeding season. So there's probably a lot of things that are that still need to be discovered about this bird. If you get the chance to hear a Sawet owl, you're going to hear a repetitive toot, 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 about one every 2 seconds, 1 toot every 2 seconds or so. So here's the audio and recording of a northern Sawet owl. And I mistakenly said 1 toot every 2 seconds. I should have said 2 toots a second. But again, to me, I hear a truck backing up when I hear a Sawet owl. And those first 4 owls we learned about are more or less forest dwellers, so they're often found in woodlands in our area. This one actually has a preference for a different type of habitat. This is the short-eared owl, and they nest and hunt in large grasslands. So your large meadows, fields, agricultural areas. And in Pennsylvania, this is an uncommonly documented breeding bird. However, we do see a lot of them in the wintertime as those northern populations migrate south. And where they do breed in Pennsylvania are typically along reclaimed strip mining sites, especially out in the western counties, Cambria County and Clearfield County, I think has some, or at least did have some. And I think years ago, I think in the first breeding bird atlas, they had some in the Philadelphia area, I believe around the airport. They are pretty, I won't say easy to find. However, if you know where the habitat is, you have a good chance of finding one of these birds. At dusk, go find those large open areas with tall grasses, and just keep an eye out for a silhouette to pop up from the grasses and give this bat-like flight as it's flying around the field searching for food. Short-eared owls do have a vocalization. It's described as a bark, but typically they're silent, especially in the wintertime. But let's play the bark calls of the short-eared owl. So kind of a scratchy little dog type bark that they give. Next is this very elusive bird. You know, the short-eared owl is a rare breeder in our state, which is mainly due to the lack of suitable habitat. But this owl is one, if not the rarest and least understood bird that breeds in Pennsylvania. This is the long-eared owl. And it seems no matter how much effort is put into understanding this bird, it remains elusive. It has a large range, though. It's actually found throughout the Northern Hemisphere, so Northern North America, Europe, and Asia. But it's highly secretive and incredibly difficult to document and observe, especially since they typically freeze in very dense foliage when they're disturbed. Unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, they have been added to the state's threatened species list. And one, because of breeding numbers are low, but also their wintering numbers from those migrating northern populations aren't being that high as they once were. So their numbers seem to be on a decline. So the Pennsylvania Game Commissions for many years now has been asking for everyone's help to document this really cool but unknown bird. And if you do come across one, whether visually or after hearing their calls tonight, you're able to identify them by their sound, you can reach out to the endangered species biologist for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, Patty Barber, and just put long-eared owl in the subject line. Long-eared owls give a very soft hoot, hoot, that's repeated one every so many seconds. So here's the calls of the long-eared owl that we need to be paying attention to. So this is a muffled, soft hoot. So really neat bird. One I've yet to add to my life list. So hopefully one day I'll come across one. Next is North America's only representative of the family Titonidae, the barn owls. Here we have the American barn owl. And in Pennsylvania, their population tends to be concentrated in the southeastern quarter of the state, maybe the southern third of the state, where there's a lot of agricultural area since they like to nest and forage in those type of habitats. Their population is dropping in the state, however, due to a decrease of farmlands over the past several decades, unfortunately. Again, this has that heart-shaped facial profile, which differs from the typical owls with the round or oval-shaped profile. And again, some people see the face of a monkey when they see a barn owl. Their call, if you want to call it a call, it's more of a blood-curdling shriek that if you aren't aware of what barn owls sound like, may definitely give you the creeps. So here's the shrieks of the American barn owl.
We're not hearing anything on this one.
Oh no.
There's a request that you demonstrate the shriek, Tony.
It's blood curdling. It sounds like something out of a horror movie. I can't demonstrate it. But I will say, young great horned owls also give a very similar call. It's a very short shriek that they use for begging purposes. So that could potentially confuse you. And it confused me once too. I was like, oh my goodness, I have a barn owl. Then I realized, oh, I have nesting great horned owls, which is pretty neat too. But we will send you the link to that audio file. Okay, our very last owl, and probably the one most easily recognized. This is the snowy owl. And this is the largest, or at least the heaviest owl in North America. Females weighing up to 4 pounds, which is still 60% less than that Blakiston's fish owl of Asia. So that owl is just huge. Adult males seen here are more or less a pure white, while females and younger birds have black bars and spotting. Now, this is a bird of the tundra. However, we are fortunate enough to at least get a few in Pennsylvania each winter. I believe there's one in Lancaster County that was reported as recent as today. There might be a few more throughout the state. And every now and then, we get to experience a large number of snowy owls descending into the continental US. In fact, back in 2013, 2014, we had what was called an eruption, which is this mass dispersal of snowy owls. And this map here, taken from eBird and Project Snowstorm, shows all the sightings between November and December of 2013. And we had quite a few in Pennsylvania and tons of them along the coast. In fact, that poor image that you see there is My Life for Snowy Owl taken on the Outer Banks of North Carolina that very November. And if you zoom out, you can see how far that eruption extended to. There's snowy owl in Florida, Bermuda, looks like Mississippi and Arkansas. So we don't get that every year, but we get a few. And again, that's an eruption, which corresponds in part, at least, to summers where the vast majority of offspring survive due to great food resources. So all those lemmings and voles. And I believe it tends to be the younger birds that disperse and drift south for winter in those eruption years. I've never heard a snowy owl. I don't know if they vocalize on their wintering grounds, but hopefully this recording will play so we can actually get to hear what a snowy owl sounds like. They give a series of hoots and chuckles. So a really neat bird. Whenever you're driving past an agricultural field that's been harvested, just look for that big white plastic bag out in the field and try to turn it into a snowy owl by scoping it out. All right. So tonight, if you hear any owls around your home, you can't identify it except for that what two didn't we get to hear, the great horned owl and the screech owl. But we'll send you links to those audio recordings so you can learn those. Also, hopefully, you now have a better understanding of how this group of birds are so highly successful being airborne hunters of the nighttime environment. And I'm really glad you all tuned in and watched this webinar from the Pennsylvania Society for Ornithology. I want to thank all the members who support the organization and take part in the various initiatives that are developed. And if you're not a member already, but interested in joining or learning more about it, you can visit our website at pabirds.org. We have a lot of different resources that you can check out to learn about birds and birding. And of course, everyone, regardless of membership status, is welcome to follow our Facebook pages and the various groups that we offer to. So I would like to thank you all for joining me this evening, and I will open up the Q&A and do my best to answer your questions.
Yeah, we have some great questions in the Q&A box, and so we can start working on those. Tony, do you want me to read some of those to you, or do you want to work through them and answer them?
Yeah, read them out loud.
Okay, so I'm going to turn on my video. I don't know if you want to do that too, since
Yeah, sure.
it's at the end. Is there a specific reason as to why owls have different face shapes? That's the first question we got.
That's a good question, probably for someone who knows more about the evolution of the owls. I'm assuming it deals with the lineages, going back to some split of the evolutionary links. But yeah, I don't know what the specific reason is. I don't know. That's a good question. If anyone out there knows some of these questions that are too technical and advanced for me, feel free to share too.
Yeah, that's great. It is a great question. So how did those 3 rare owls arrive in North America? You listed 3.
Yeah, the 3 rarities. Yeah.
Yeah.
Birds have wings. They could go where they like. That's the neat thing about birding. You just never know what's going to show up. I mean, there are cases where it might be an escapee from some type of collection or a zoo, or brought over on purpose. But if it's a wild bird that shows up in our area, or vice versa, our birds show up in foreign areas. A lot of times they're wandering. Sometimes they get caught on, storm systems. Sometimes they're just completely misguided. But that's the fun part about birding. Was a couple years ago, the black-backed oriole outside of Reading, that Mexican bird in Pennsylvania. So crazy things happen with animals that have wings.
That's right. That's right. How does the asymmetrical ear structure in owls compare with that of other species?
Other species of owls or other species of birds?
I assumed like other species of animals, but maybe you could take it anyway. Like,
Yeah, I'll try to answer.
are there other bird species that have asymmetry? Are there other animal species that have asymmetry?
I don't know of any. I've never come across anything in all my readings that other birds or any other animal has asymmetrical ear openings. So yeah, I think everything else is symmetrical. But that's a hunch. So I don't have anything saying that's the case, but that's my hunch.
Yeah, that's a great question.
It is.
Can the owls move their eyes in their sockets?
They cannot. So remember that sclerotic ring actually locks the eye into place. So this is the case for all birds. They cannot move their eyes around. They can't look up or down or roll their eyes if they're a teenager with their parent. So that's why they kind of bob and weave and try to get their eyes locked in onto a subject by having them physically move their head. But because of that ring, it does allow or prevent their vision from being distorted as they're flying through the air, so they can see just fine when, we have to wear goggles if we're going faster, or else we tear up and our vision kind of suffers a little bit, but their eyes are fine. And also gives them much sharper vision than we could ever imagine.
Yeah, that's cool. This one's interesting. Anita asks, I've seen pictures of owls where they're facing the camera, but have rotated their head upside down. I've always wondered why they would want to look at anything upside down. I love it.
That is a good question. And you always see that burrowing owl image, right? It's kind of like this. I don't know why. I don't know what advantage they would have from it. Geez, I have to look into that and see if someone knows an answer out there. But that's a really great question. I don't know why. I can't imagine. I can only speculate, but that's just using my imagination. So I don't want to say anything that's way off course.
Yeah, I agree. It's so interesting though. Melissa wrote, when I found an owl pellet of a great horned owl in the farm fields near our house, I found a rabbit bones but no skull. Is it true they don't eat the rabbit's head, unlike the smaller mammals and birds they eat? Where do you find the skulls?
Okay.
Where you do find
So that's a good point. So with larger animals, obviously a great horned owl, being a big bird, still can't swallow the rabbit whole. So it does rip it into strips and then devours those strips whole. So if bones are involved or hair, it's all going in. I believe they will often kind of take the head off, and it's possible they've this is me being anthropomorphic, but they realize there may not be much flesh involved with the head. So, it's mainly just bone. So they may not bother swallowing that, or maybe that might be something that is too big for them to swallow. But yeah, with larger animals, they kind of just strip and gulp it down.
Thanks. Are there any are any owls endangered in Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania. So long-eared is on a threatened list for the state. And short ears, I don't think they're on the threatened state, but there's very uncommon breeders. But I don't think anything's endangered. Do you know of
Barn
any,
owls
Jerry?
are close.
They're getting close to, aren't they? So
Yeah.
I don't think anything is endangered yet, and hopefully we could keep it that way.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think anything's endangered here.
Yeah, I agree. Do owls coexist with bats, or do they hunt bats?
That's a neat question.
Yeah.
I guess it's possible they could, take a bat that might be, roosting. Anything's possible when it comes to food. I've never seen anything written down that they go after bats. But food is food when it comes to wildlife. And do they coexist with bats? I'm sure there's I guess you could say they coexist in terms they don't disturb one another. They're off doing their own things. Bats are feeding on insects that are flying. Your beetles and moths. So they're not really competing at all with one another. As far as I can't think of any situation they could compete with in terms of food or roosting or nesting spots. So I think they coexist just fine and just kind of leave each other be. But I'm sure it's possible, and I'm sure it's happened before where an owl has eaten a bat. I have to find that documentation.
Yeah, Chad adds that owls can take bats that come in to get bugs at lights. So, and Carol writes, I know screech owls have been documented hunting bats as well, night migrating songbirds. So that's really cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
I hadn't learned about that before either.
Right.
Barred owls and screech owls hunt bats. That's really interesting.
That's neat. That is neat.
Thanks, Jeannie. Can you describe the nesting conditions required for long-eared owls?
That's a good question, and one that's kind of, I won't say unanswered, but there's still a lot of questions too. It's from what I've read, it tends to be thick forests, usually mixed. Some conifers in there near open habitat, because they will actually forage in open habitat, so those fields and open landscapes. So they like to nest along the wood edge. But yeah, there's still a lot of questions when it comes to long-eared owls, and I hopefully we start answering them and start figuring out more about them.
Yeah, related to that, someone was asking if long-eared owls and the great horned owl compete for habitat.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I do not know. It's a good question.
Wayne Lobsher adds that short-eared owls are endangered in Pennsylvania. So they're endangered in Pennsylvania, but not federally.
All right. Good to know. Thank you.
add. So thanks, you guys. Thanks for adding. There, we have so many people in this webinar that also have a wealth of knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. So it's quite intimidating talking tonight, knowing there'll be some people out there or might be giving me a look through the screen.
Have some expertise. Is it legal to collect barn owl pellets in Pennsylvania to dissect with students?
I never even thought about that because, when it comes to birds, you have to be careful with all the state and federal laws. I know you can buy them.
Yeah.
I buy them for my students. So, of course, those come from captive owls. So there might be a difference in that. But I don't, man, that's a good question. I'll have to ask a game commission about that one. So keep everyone safe. No collecting barn owl pellets until we get a definitive answer. But you can buy them legally. I know that for sure. You get them through Acorn Naturalist and all sorts of educational organizations and websites. Anything new about fluorescence in owl feathers? I don't know if there's anything new. And Ronald is referring to the fact that when Sawet owls are banded, they actually take a UV light and shine it on the wings of a Sawet owl, and the feathers will glow depending on the amount of fluorescence or whatever the technical chemical is called, and they use that to age the bird up to, I think, 2 years after hatching. I don't know if there's been anything new about that. I think that's all standard status, I don't think there's anything new, but that's what Ronald's referring to with that question, is the fact that they actually put the wings under UV light and they glow. That's pretty neat to see.
That is very cool. There's a question or a comment and then a question. I have a barn owl on my property, which makes little sense if they like open agricultural areas. We live on the top of a mountain in the woods. Is this normal, or is he just flying through?
No idea. I have no idea.
Right.
I wouldn't expect it, but anything's possible, I suppose. I don't know. Definitely document that. Get that on, eBird, or see if you get a photograph of it or a recording to document it and make sure that's known.
Yeah, get some recordings, audio recordings would be great, because sometimes it's hard to get a good photo. But as we heard with some of the recordings we could hear, we can tell the difference between most of these species.
Yeah, and it could be, remember, I alluded to the barn owl. If you're just going based on hearing, you might have seen this, and this comment would be moot, but young great horned owls sound like a barn owl. So make sure you rule that out first.
Have you ever used acoustical monitoring devices and software for owls? One of our naturalists is pursuing that as his service project, and I'm intrigued.
I personally have not. However, the state park I work at, we do have research going on in Sawet owls, and one of those researchers, a young man who's going for his master's degree out of Bloomsburg University, is going to have acoustic monitoring devices throughout the park to try to document them breeding in the park. So that's as far as my experiences with those. But they're passive recorders, just kind of timed to record from this period of time to the next time slot, and they're passive. So you actually have to go through the files and listen for the owls themselves. So he's not using the software.
Yeah. Why is having one ear lower than the other more useful than simply cocking their head sideways?
Well, it's two things. So the ears, the openings are asymmetrical. They're also pointed or oriented different directions. And I believe it's the reverse of the location on the head. So the upper ear is kind of pointed downwards and the lower ear is pointed upwards. I believe that's the case. And both ears are actually attuned to different frequencies. So it's a whole slew of things going on in your ears. And if they just we could cock our heads too, but that doesn't help us locate a sound anymore or any better than just having our head straight ahead. So by having that asymmetrical hearing system, just that difference of time it takes from the sound wave to go to one ear to the other, and that intensity of volume just allows these birds to lock on a target and something we're not even capable of imagining, I don't think. But it works profoundly for them.
Okay, so here's one. Let's see how you do. Without going into too much explicit detail, how exactly do owls mate? What gets an owl in the mood?
Oh, geez. This is a question I didn't research for, unfortunately. Based on generalizations, but there's hormones at play, and that are probably seasonal, just like songbirds. The longer lengths of day trigger hormones. They're getting ready for breeding, and for owls, they're using vocalizations as well as displays. They might do little dances around the partner, and also, I think all owls are monogamous for life. So maybe they don't have to do too much to get the other one in the mood. I don't know. And how they actually do it is, oh geez, Julie, aren't you more an expert in this than I am on bird behavior and reproduction?
No, I'm a PhD in astrophysics.
Okay. So you should know this stuff. Yeah, oh geez. It's been a long time since I've looked into bird reproduction. I think it's more.
Jeannie has a good response. YouTube has videos that, if people were interested, you could probably find some YouTube videos that show you.
Catherine, I wish I could give you a really good answer, but I don't have the information in my head. I'd have to look it up. But it is a really good question.
Yeah, it's all part of the. Yeah, it's right. It's good trivia for the next cocktail party that we.
Yes, that's right. So some things have to. A lot of times when I get these questions too from people I speak to, if I don't know, I'm going into books and looking up on myself. So I get to learn myself when I attend these webinars or present these webinars too.
So we're at about 8:30. So maybe we'll have about one more question. It looks like we've gone through most of the questions. Many years ago, I swore I saw a snowy owl, but dismissed it, thinking it was not possible. But now I know it was possible. How often do they hang around in Pennsylvania?
I think every winter there's at least one or two that pops up somewhere. I think Erie, your Presque Isle State Park area is well known for wintering snowy owls. They'll get a couple. Again, I know there's at least one in the state right now in Lancaster County. So usually you get a few throughout the winter. They might hang around for, a day, a couple weeks, maybe a month. And then come late winter, they're going to head back north as if they stay healthy in their wintering habitat, which will give me one point to make too when it comes to snowy owls. They are magnificent birds. We all want to see them, but they sometimes are victims of very excited people who want to get closer and closer and closer and see how close they can get. They do need their space because they just flew from the tundra, and they might have a hard time locating food sources in Pennsylvania, so they're going to be stressed, and we want to make sure we don't stress them any further. And of course, that goes with any bird or wildlife, but snowy owls tend to be the one people want to get closer and closer to. So I'll just throw that out there, just make sure we respect those birds.
So I wanted to add one more thing. I thought that Laura asked a good question in the chat. Any general tips on birding for owls? So we've, gone through quite a bit of good information on owls and what they're like, but how would you go about birding for owls?
Yeah, we were talking about this prior too. It's sometimes luck, and it's a lot of bad luck before good luck. Putting time in, being prepared to be outside at night in the cold when they're active and they're fine, but we're not too keen to being out there. A lot of people use playback, or they'll play the call and hope to get a response. If you do that, just make sure you're doing it in a responsible way. Once that owl, play it once. If you get nothing, move on. If you play it once and you give a call back, be happy with that one call back. Don't try to keep enticing the owl to keep responding. But just looking for different habitat too. If you're in one area of a park or campground, and you're not getting something one night, try a different area. But it's all about persistence, I think, because there's many times I go out there looking for owls, and if I don't get cold before I quit, call it quits, I'm just bummed. So yeah,
I think that's all really good advice. Well, thanks so much, Tony. This has been a wonderful
absolutely
presentation. We got lots of great feedback in the chat. Everyone really enjoyed your talk.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
And we will post this on our new YouTube channel. So
you can check it out anytime. And like I said, not next month, March, we'll be talking about the breeding bird blitz for conservation. And then in May, we're talking about migrating songbirds and how they cope in different habitats as they migrate through, especially those dominated by invasive plant species. So hopefully you all check this out, or join us in person at those the county birding spotlights, Cambria County in March, and then Adams County in April. So, and we'll have more stuff coming up too. So keep an eye on Facebook and the PSO newsletters too. We'll publish all this information for you. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Hopefully you all picked up a new tidbit of information, at least one tidbit of information, and hopefully when you get to hear those owls calling from behind your house, or when you go camping or out in the park, you'll be able to identify them now just by their vocalizations.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all so much for joining us.